Okay, so we should be live now. I'm sitting in my beer cave, and with me is George and Rowan from Moersleutel, and we're going to talk about stouts. So yeah, let's kick it. So we're live now, guys. Hey George, hey Rowan.
Hi Lars.
Hey. Well, first of all, can you tell me a little bit about who you are? So George, you can start.
Yeah, I'll go first. My name is George. I've been at the Moersleutels for the past 2.5 years. I'm the head brewer. So currently I'm in charge of developing recipes and focusing on the creative part of brewing, making sure that we can get exciting beers out there, be that a stout, an IPA, barrel-aged stout, adjunct stout, or something else. So that's pretty much what I do around here.
Cool.
And hi guys, I'm Rowan. I've been with the Moersleutel for about 1.5 years now. I'm head of cellar fermentation, so I tweak the beers so they become perfect for packaging. I'm about the fermentation, the yeast, and the final flavor tweaks. So that's about what I do there. So
Yeah.
fun to be here, Lars.
Yeah, I hope so. Hope it's going to be cool. Well, I think we should have something to drink. I'm going to drink motor oil, which is your Russian imperial stout. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about this beer and how it's brewed and go into details with this. And also the barcode. Which one do you have all the details on? Is that the barcode?
We got both. We know Moersleutels by heart. It's one of the core range beers that have been together with us at the Moersleutels for, well, ever since we started brewing back in 2016. So it's quite a staple beer around here.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So just to pronounce your brewery correct, it's called Moersleutel. Moersleutel?
Yes. Yeah. Moersleutel.
Moersleutel, yes. Perfect. What defines Moersleutel as a brewery, do you think?
We try to achieve perfection in a holistic way, so that never really happens. So we're always trying to prove our beers, but at core, we try to make these big, bold, flavorful beers, which means we take a lot of risks in the recipes we develop, bringing very extreme yet balanced beers, but we're never shy from a challenge. We call ourselves the beer engineers because of the four brothers that founded the company. All of them are engineers. We actually also run a sister company called Zommerdijk Engineering. That's an engineering company providing solutions for in-feed and out-feed of packaging materials for other breweries and other small companies like ourselves. So we always like to face the challenge and try to come on top of it. So that's why we aim to get these legendary beers brewed.
Ah, cool, awesome. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about your stouts. What defines a good stout in your mind, an imperial stout?
I'll let Rowan take this one first.
What defines an imperial stout? For us, it's always going into one of the most important things is texture, the thickness, but also the bold flavors, as in what kind of roast are you picking up? How are you balancing the beer with yeast and hops or adjuncts? I'm not sure. The barcode has an adjunct, I think, Tonka, but no big pastry stouts today. But we're always looking in how can we balance that beer in a way, even after recipe development, when it gets into tank, when it gets into the bright beer tank, what can we do to make it even pop more. That's the idea in our imperial stouts.
Yeah, sure.
So
So when you make a stout or make any beer, you're not done making the beer just after the brewing part.
no,
The
no,
cellar
it goes.
part means just as much. Or,
Yeah, I'm a bit biased, of course, because
yeah.
I run that department. So it's but yeah, I think it's very important to look after the yeast and the beer. But I also mean like sometimes we have adjuncts in mind that if we do trials, it just doesn't work out. And what defines our stouts at that point is being able to tweak it in a different way to make it the best we possibly can. So it doesn't stop at recipe development and the brew day,
No.
but it goes all the way to the packaging.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because whenever people talk about stouts, we always tend to think about the style guidelines. They were very heavily implemented by the US philosophy of getting into style guidelines. We try to see beer more as a flavor component, like Rowan was saying. So if you look at the traditional stout, it has roasted barley in its composition. And we don't always use roasted barley because we believe we can craft it in some different ways. We don't need to follow those guidelines to make a great stout. And that's the proof that we've been doing hundreds of stouts these years, and they all go different approaches. And usually they share similarities, of course, but they always have a soul of their own.
Yeah. So you don't have a base recipe that you use for most of your stouts, or?
No, that would be quite boring. I mean,
Yeah.
if we had a base recipe and we just made the same recipe all over again, just changing the flavors, that would be no fun.
Yeah.
The fun in here, it's like cooking. You just get a set of tools and you just combine different flavors. So pretty much all beers that we brew, all stouts, they have different recipes. And I'm being completely honest. Like we try to get adjusted recipe for each of the stouts we brew to make them. I mean, if we want nutty flavors to go, we'll choose a different base malt, or if we want more dry or whatever it comes to be, we try to adjust it based on the project we're working on.
So what about the motor oil? What can you tell us about that in terms of recipe, and how did you come up with the recipe? And is there something special about it? I don't get that much roasted flavors in this. I actually get more like sweet molasses, and I get dried fruit, and then maybe a little bit of coffee, or yeah. But it's not that dry, not that burnt flavors or roasted flavors.
Moersleutels has 8 different malts, if memory serves me right. We do some base malt, usually some pale ale malt as the base malt. We layer it up with a little bit of Munich and wheat malt as well to get some complexity on the base. Then we layer different types of caramel and melanoid in the malts. And we have quite a high portion of dark grains, but none of those are roasted barley. I think that's why you don't pick up a lot of roasted note into it, more of the deep molasses, kind of licorice notes. That's from black malt, chocolate malt, and specialty. So that's roughly where we touch base on these dark malts. All of our stouts are double mashed. I don't want to get too technical, I guess, but pretty much we're just using more grains, less water, trying to get the most concentrated wort possible to increase the OG and therefore ABV as well. But not only that, but to concentrate flavors as well. Yeah. So everything is double mashed on that purpose.
So what is your water to grist ratio if you have a thick mash?
It's we're about 2 liters per kilo of grain.
Okay, yeah.
That's a thick mash. Our sweet point. That's a pretty thick mash, and it's our sweet point between the grains quantity, kettle size, everything, vessel size. We try to use less. We're able to, but it just doesn't work out because it's too little wort collected. So 2 liters per kilo of grain is usually where we find our right balance, where we like the beers.
Yeah. Okay.
You kind of have to point out that we have a mesh filter though, George. So we don't have the trouble of going through a painful lauter.
Okay. So you can almost mash flour with that, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much what we do. Yeah, that's what characterizes the mash filter for who's out there listening, as they might be curious. So it's pretty much a set of plates, as if it was a filter, like a lager beer filter, a plate filter, where the slurry from the mash gets thinned out per plate, and that just allows for efficiency to be way higher than the regular lauter. So we're able to aim about 80% efficiency in our stouts. It gets higher with IPAs, but on stouts we get about 80%. But it's not only about efficiency, that's the economical standpoint and viewpoint, but I think more like flavor improvement.
Yeah.
So we installed the filter at about 2 years now. I think it's right about 2 years that we first commissioned the mash filter. But in terms of flavor, it really captures the essence of the grains you're using. So just the depth of flavor just gets way more complex when you have such a tool at your disposal. And that allows us to mash thicker and all that. So.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not using rice hulls or anything in that?
No, that's just flour. So we have a hammer mill, contrary to the typical roller mill, where we do both our roasted and regular grains through the hammer mill. Grains everything to a flour consistency, makes kind of a paste, but the husk is still present, the malt husk.
Yeah.
And the filter is enough to filter the wort. We don't need to add any additional husks anymore. We used to use them.
Okay. So are you adding, because that thick mash, and I'm just thinking all the enzymes may have hard to do their work in such a thick mash. Do you add any enzymes to the mash?
No, we've made some trials, but we see a loss of quality if we do exogenous enzymes, so we tend not to use them. Eventually, if we have some different grains, such as buckwheat, like we've used in the past, or rye, we may get to the point of using it to aid the process, but we usually try to fade away. It's funny that you mentioned the enzymes. It's actually a very good point. That would usually be a problem, but our mashing system guarantees that the grains and water are mixed perfectly. So during the process of mashing in, you're getting conversion on the spot immediately, because the water and the grains are being mixed evenly as they're moved from the grist box into the mash tun. So we've seen pretty good results with the 30-minute mash rest. We don't see a huge difference on going a full hour. So and we've done thoroughly tests on enzyme concentrations and conversion, and we've been clear so far.
Okay. What is do you know the OG in motor oil?
Yeah, it's usually around 30 Plato.
Okay.
So that's 1120.
Yeah, 1120. Okay, yeah. What's the final gravity?
Goes to between 10 and 12 Plato, I think.
Okay, so
Usually
1030. What's that?
1040
1040?
and 48, something like that. 1040, 1050, something
Okay.
like that.
Yeah.
So it's pretty high, but it's not pastry stout high, I would say.
No. It's a really, really good imperial stout, I must say. So what role does the hops play in this? Because it still feels balanced. It's not overly sweet, even though you said the final gravity is 1040. It's not overly sweet. It still tastes balanced, I think. So what's I'm guessing it's the hops that does that, or what?
I think it's the amount of hops, definitely. We use about, I think, 1 to 10 grams. I can make the calculation here quickly.
Like 60 IBU, right?
Yeah, it's about
IBU.
60 IBU.
Yeah.
But I think the 60 IBU may seem a little bit low for the beer, that is. If you look at some classical imperial stouts, they usually have higher IBU, like now thinking of North Coast Old Rasputin, I think it's around 90, for example, one of the classic imperial stouts.
Yeah.
But I think that the fact we use whereabouts 15% to 20% dark grains, so things above 600 EBC, also imparts a lot of bitterness.
Yeah.
So we tend to see hops as the only bittering and balancing factor in beer, because that's the majority of beers we drink, and we're used to think about beer as a, pale yellow liquid or a pale ale or whatever. When you're talking about beer, when you talk about research in beer, no one really touches base on stouts. So I think it plays a huge role in stouts, the roasted malt or dark malts, to balance out some sweetness too. So that's why we're able to, in some extreme cases, to go up to nearly 30% roasted grains
Okay.
and still have balanced beers. So
Yeah.
it's, in the end, it's all about balance.
Yeah. So 30% roasted grains and then almost no hops, or how does that work?
Yeah, usually we aim for the same amount of hops. That's one of the things we have nearly constant
Okay.
in most of our stouts, except the ones that go full on exploring hops. We've had some dark beers that we explore hops a lot, but on a regular malt ale or non-adjunct stouts or some of the pastry stouts, we usually have a pretty standardized hopping rate because we know it just works to our profile.
Yeah. Cool. What kind of hops do you use for bittering? Is it
Magnum, it's the
Magnum?
one
Okay.
we
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So you're not using extracts for bittering?
No,
No?
we use them for a little while just to trial with them, but we think that using actual hops, so there's a lot of things that you capture from the hops that get more depth and complexity to a beer,
Okay.
be that a stout or an IPA. So we've used extracts, but I think those processing aids, they are just processing aids with the expense of flavor, and we like flavor, so we like to keep the real stuff around.
Yeah. Awesome. Are you adding any flavor aroma hops to the
Not
stouts?
too much, not too much oil, no. It depending on the recipe, we may sometimes more, sometimes less. Sometimes we dry up them. We've treated some stouts as IPAs, doing a double dry up
Okay.
on them as well. It really depends on which style of stout we're trying to go for. So
Yeah.
we specialize in stouts. We've made several hundred of different recipes. So it really depends what we're trying to achieve, but we like to see stout as a canvas to play around with things.
Yeah. So how can you continue to develop hundreds of recipes for imperial stouts and they all seem to just taste great? Who inspires you?
I think, yeah, that's a good question actually. I think it's partly a experience though that we know how to produce the great wort now. But you can do so much within the imperial stout category that it doesn't really pour. There's we make so many specials that it doesn't really get boring.
No.
Well, it has to do with planning and the freedom we have to make our own planning. I guess if we were always to make the same pastry style stouts of going through, like chocolate vanilla coffee and a mix of these, that could get boring eventually. But since we're allowed to explore different adjuncts, I don't know, we've used from hibiscus to black cardamom. I even lost count. Like we're working on some cherry peats right now. We've done a date syrup. We've done honey. I mean, it's countless the things we're allowed to experiment around, and I think that's the nice challenge, that each beer is unique, and we try to always come up with something that makes it stand out.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah, you do. Cool. So, we're not going to talk that much about adjuncts, but what about minerals? How are you treating your water?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, it's probably one of the most overlooked things in a beer, I'd say. we were able to change our beers 180 degrees by just tweaking the water profile. Especially on these beers, like as I was mentioning before, all of the research and scientific knowledge that you can find about beer usually goes about either pale ales or regular beers, like lagers. No one's doing research on stouts.
No.
So it's pretty difficult for us that we spend a lot of time reading about beer, drinking beer to find what other brewers are doing, taking actual college degrees to see if we can find anything, but we always get to this paper talks about lagers. So it's pretty difficult to us because we need to find a lot of these things ourselves because no one is doing, I would say, don't quote me on this, but likely worldwide, no one's doing as much hectoliters of stouts over 10% ABV as we are. So we are quite a unique brewery on that standpoint. So that allows us to do a lot of our own research, but that also comes with a lot of risk. So we change our water profile throughout the years. We use tap water, pretty much just local sourced water. I can let Rowan talk about his pride in Dutch water, but it's a thing. We're very proud of our local water.
So you
But
have
nonetheless, it needs
soft water there?
It's pretty hard
Okay.
water.
Yeah.
Which is quite cool for the stouts. It really helps to balance out because the acidic notes on the dark grains will bring the pH down, but we still need to correct by the amounts of dark grains we use. But I can say it makes a world of a difference focusing on water. To us, that's challenging because we need to test it several times to get the right profile.
Yeah, yeah. So what minerals do you add to it? Yeah, is it calcium, chlorides, or what are you focused on?
Do you want to go, Rowan? Do you know them by heart?
Usually it's no, it's not calcium chloride, right? It's bicarbonate and the slaked lime right now. We switched it around a couple of months ago. We do for certain beers, certain water profiles. So I think where it started was the British stout a couple months ago. We started using slaked lime instead of calcium carbonate.
Okay.
Instead of sodium bicarbonate, that's the
Sodium
name. And slaked lime, it's calcium hydroxide. So pretty much you want alkaline stuff to balance out the acidity in your dark grains. So you maintain the desired mash pH. But the thing is, all of these things, they are flavor compounds, so they can impact your beer. Maybe if you're tweaking with a tiny portion, you want too much, but we need to add them in quantity because we're dealing with a lot of these dark grains and a lot of cereal, so we can have an impact in the flavor. So depending on each recipe, we try to adjust the water profile to aim it where we want it to be. So for some beers, if you're looking for additional body, for example, you use some calcium chloride to get some more body. You may use some magnesium sulfate or calcium sulfate to enhance hops and bring out some bitterness and provide some drying to beers. Some other beers, you may use sodium bicarbonate to get a more round flavor because it has, as the name suggests, sodium as in content of table salt. So that brings a more round flavor enhancing perspective. If you're doing like a Baltic porter, for example, it's something softer that's well fermented with the lager yeast, so the whole profile just cleaner. And then we may use the calcium hydroxide, the slaked lime, because that one just imparts kind of a smoothness into the beer. So we tend to adjust our mineral additions depending on what we want to get.
You also do multiple different of the minerals, right? Because if you go very high on one of the minerals, you pass the flavor threshold, and that would just get nasty at some point.
Yeah.
So it's the same as sweeteners. If you combine sugar and aspartame or something, you get one. If you do both, it's great because you're both below the threshold. If you do a lot of one, you you get above the flavor threshold and you get a tang or a weird sweetness. So that's what we do with the stouts as well. It's tweaking all the time, I would say.
Yeah, cool. I don't know if the camera can see this, but did you mention that the motor oil was about 600 EBC? Or did I get that wrong?
It's like 130.
Okay, okay, 130. That's still
I'm not sure.
really
160, 130. I don't know what the calculator is. It's hard to tell above a certain EBC.
yeah. It is. Yeah.
Above 100, it's all the same, I would say, almost.
But it is really, really dark. And the head on
so
it
we
is
do.
beautiful color, the foam.
We've done these things of sending beers out for lab analysis on a multiple range of things that maybe even most hobby brewers don't even think about ever. But the one thing we never worried about was EBC, because all of our beers are kind of black.
Yeah.
So not all, but all the stouts get to a point where they're black. We don't even bother trying to figure out the exact EBC.
No. So when you're such a dark beer, is there a lot of carafa or huskless grains in this, or why is it not more roasted than it is?
You take this one first.
Yeah, I think it's the amount and the balance between the base malts and the dark grains. We don't use carafa, so we don't use any German malts, except for the melanoidin, which is not even environment sourced. It's some other maltster. We don't use a specific grain provider, so we like to make our life more difficult and the logistics more difficult. So we just buy malts everywhere, because I mean, caramel malts, it's perceived as being one, but if you buy it in England, Germany, or Belgium, they're widely different. So depending on the profile we want, we may switch them around. Montreal is mostly Belgium malts, because that was what was available and proximate to us at the time. And we still stick to those grains. But for some other beers, we use British ingredients, German, whatever it gets to. But I think it's not as much the grain itself, but the balance between the caramel malts, which is also high in percentage when compared to base malt. So we don't use much base malt. That's what I'm pretty much saying.
Okay. How much caramel malts is in this one, and how many roasted malts?
Ooh, I'll try to say this by heart.
I'm picking it up.
I'd say less than 20, but close to 20% on roasted grains.
Okay.
And about 30-some%.
I think it's like 10-ish.
No. 20%. Everything that was supposed to go through the roller mill, that goes through the hammer mill. Chocolate rye, special B, and both M roasts.
Oh, I thought we were talking about caramel.
Yeah, also.
Yeah,
that.
so roasted is 20% and about 30%, 20 to 30%.
Okay, caramel malts. Okay.
Yeah, the rest divided between Munich, wheat, and pale malt.
Yeah. Okay. Whoa, that's a lot. Interesting. Cool. So moving on to talking a little bit about mashing. Yeah, first of all, what are you doing, a single mash, a step mash, or what? Is the beers, most of the beers, or all the beers, or how are you making them?
Yeah, all the beers are double mashed, as we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It's a single step infusion. We try to get on the high end of a conversion point. So we aim for between 69, 71 C mash rest temperature. And yeah, we've covered the mash thickness, 2 liters per kilo of grain used, and just a single infusion. That's the way our kit is built, so we don't have any control over mash temperatures. And pH, we usually aim for the higher range. That's a 5.4 pH, 5.5 depending on beers, to achieve maximum conversion in as little time as possible.
Yeah. But how are you adjusting your pH? Is that with the lactic acid, or is it acidulated malts, or how are you doing that?
Well, for the IPAs, we do a blend of acids. As Rowan mentioned, acids, especially acids, they go easily above a flavor threshold. So we tend to keep them down and make a blend between lactic and phosphoric acid to keep flavor threshold in check. For stouts, it's the other way around. We want to have some alkalinity added to it, so we cover that briefly, but we use chalk, which is calcium carbonate. We use slaked lime, which is calcium hydroxide, and we use sodium bicarbonate to correct those things depending on which style we're aiming for.
Yeah. Yeah. But how long are you mashing for? It's just under an hour, or it's just?
It's about 30 minutes.
Okay.
Our system has a pretty efficient mixing system on the way to the mash tun. So it basically dispenses water at the same rate the grains are being dispensed. So all grain gets moist before it gets to the mash tun, and that allows for the conversion to happen pretty quickly. And we've made several tests to guarantee that the 30-minute is enough.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. That saves a lot of energy as well. So the whole sustainability aspect is great there too.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving over to the boil, what do you think a boil time? How long are you boiling for?
It's an hour usually. It depends a bit on what we want to achieve, but usually stouts are an hour. If we want some kind of barley wine or beer that goes into barrels, we might go a bit longer.
Okay, why is that?
But an hour usually is more than enough.
Yeah. So why are you boiling longer if it goes in a barrel?
Get the complexity of the caramelization and the Maillard reactions inside of the kettle. So we have a direct fire kettle. Means that you have certain hotspots in the kettle that get very hot, by which you get very fast caramelization and Maillard reaction, meaning that usually an hour is enough to create flavor. We have done boils as long as 4 or 5 hours, and then you really see also the volume going down. You see it just gets so much richer, but 4 or 5 hours is just not doable for every beer. It's only for the very special beers.
Yeah.
So that's why we sometimes do it. Not for all beers.
Yeah. So a 5-hour boil, what does it do for the beer? Is it just more concentrated and more flavorful, or what do you feel that it does?
It brings, to me, it usually brings out the base malt a lot more. It's quite interesting if you use like something like Golden Promise or Moersleutels. You really get more breadiness, some caramelization on the breadiness, toasty. Yeah, it gets to a next level, I would say. Right, George? You experiment much more with this, but
yeah, I quite like the long boil approach. I know we've made some pretty cool beers with it. Especially on the barley wine side. I think we're still yet to try on a long boil. When I'm saying long, I say like 5, 6, 10 hours, like an actual long boil.
Yeah.
We still are to experiment that with the stout. The most we've done was, I don't know, 4, 5 hours on the stout. But we're planning on sometime this year to get onto a long boil, make a triple mash kind of beer for some special. But for the barley wines, we do a lot that really contributes flavor. It's difficult to explain because we've made the same recipe with and without a long boil, and it just transforms the beer completely. I know it sounds like a bit crazy, but if we aim, it's not only sugar content, it's also flavor development, because we can make the same beer by just adding sugar or just adding more grain, and you can get the same 30 Plato for a barley wine. But if you achieve those 30 Platos by boiling, they're far more complex than achieving the same 30 Plato by adding sugars or grain to it. So there's something definitely that boiling for long periods of time that does to the beers, and I think it's a great way to achieve great flavors for some of these thick big beers.
Yeah. So I've heard of breweries doing a boil for 24 hours. Are we going to see that anytime soon from you?
Maybe if management allows me,
Yeah.
but I want to.
Yeah, cool.
Do we have any wort left by then? Our kettle is far too strong to do something like that. Our kettle is oversized.
I have a plan. You gotta trust me on this.
Cool. So are you making any additions other than hops to your boil? Are you adding any sugars or are you adding any, something?
We do whirl flock.
Yeah.
Just processing aids, that's all. Whirl flock, some yeast nutrients.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
Sometimes a flame out of hops. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I guess only spices if we're doing some beer with spices. I know we've done a Nordic Star 2 years back for Christmas. We've done one that tastes my Yellow Log last year for Christmas season. And the beers where we use spices, we usually tend them to use hot cider during whirlpool, but often we don't do great additions during boil.
Okay, cool. Okay, so moving on to fermentation. How are you cooling the wort down? Is that a plate chiller or?
It's a pretty big plate chiller. Usually we needed like 30 minutes, between 30 minutes and an hour to get the whole kettle into the fermenter.
Okay. How many liters is one kettle?
2,500, so 25 hectoliters.
Yeah.
We can pump it up to almost 30. But usually it's we calculate everything based on 25, 26 hectoliters.
Yeah. Cool. And then are you oxygenating it when it arrives in the fermentation tank, or what are you doing then?
It's in line after the heat exchanger. So there's a carbonation stone after the heat exchanger. So when the wort is cooled down, we can pretty easily control the amount of oxygen that's going in.
Yeah.
We done measurements. We have a portable oxygen meter, and usually it's what we expect it to be. So that's quite nice.
Yeah, because I know when I brew big stouts, I guess when everyone brew big stouts, the most important thing is probably yeast health, right?
Yeah. Yeah. If your yeast is not happy, you are not gonna be happy at the end.
No. So what are you doing to keep your yeast happy?
We do quite some oxygenation. It's actually funny. We do more oxygen for the IPAs, I would say, because the yeast is just more hungry for oxygen. We do like 3 grams a liter, right, George?
3 liters per minute, which counts for about 20-some ppm, which is very on the high end. So I think we actually do the same rate for IPAs and stouts. The thing is, proportionally, it's lower for stouts, given the amount of initial sugar content you're aiming for. But I think if you aim for the grand rule of 1 ppm of oxygen per degree Plato, you should be fine. So we do 20 to 24 in stouts and the same for IPAs, but that's because English strains that ferment New England style IPAs, they're very savvy for oxygen, so we need to go extra oxygen. But I think Rowan wants to really talk about our propagation system that he very much
yeah. Oh, you set me up there. There we go.
Yeah, I know.
That's
it was a
actually
trap.
what we can talk about. Yeah, it's the since a couple. I think it's been like 6 months now. We have a proper propagator. So that's a 700 liter vessel that has a spinner in the middle that can make sure that everything is homogeneous all the time. We have a automatic oxygenation system, meaning that there is a pulse going every 5 minutes with oxygen. So we can go for maximum yeast growth instead of the fermentation. So yeast has 2 different pathways it can take. It's either cell growth or fermentation. And by giving it a constant stream of oxygen, you will push it into the growth phase. This, practically speaking, that means that we can turn one yeast cell into if we do homebrew packs, we can turn 5 into 20 within 24 hours, and those 20 will go to 100 in 48 hours.
Yeah.
So it's like we can get away with a lot now with the healthy yeast we get. Let's see. Usually, it gets 4 times growth within 24 hours, and then even more 48. So what we have been doing is we do a propagation of a certain yeast, whatever we want. We pull a part out of the propagator, and in the same cast of wort going to the fermenter, we push wort back into the propagator. So you start a second propagation for the next batch.
Yeah.
So we've been planning beers now that 1 week has the same yeast, and then the week after has the same yeast.
Okay.
So we go as efficiently as possible with the yeast we have.
Yeah. So you're not just using one yeast. You don't have a house yeast. You're changing them up all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. For now, we've been doing a lot of playing around, but before that, we did a lot of dry and direct pitches. So this is like a breath of new air. Let's say.
So, what yeast is in motor oil? Is that an SO4 or is it what's that?
USO5. That's the American strain.
Okay. Yeah. Is that the same in the blue code, the blue barcode?
I guess so, but that's a bit hard to say because the barrel-aged beers are always a blend of certain barrels, and we don't really put beer on barrels with a certain idea in mind. We give the barrel master the freedom to blend certain flavors together, do trials to see what is the best blend. So it might be that there are actually 3 or 4 different. No, it's not, but in the future it can be.
Okay. Okay.
But there's actually multiple different ones in there.
Yeah. So what about? So now we oxygenated the wort, we added yeast, so now it's practically beer. Are you recirculating in the tank, or is it just leaving it there, or what's your fermentation like?
So we oxygenate throughout the whole cast of the beer, so putting it in the fermenter. So the oxygen is already everywhere, and the yeast is liquid, and we push it from the propagator into after at the same moment as the oxygen actually. Yeah. So it's all in line. We put the yeast in line as well. So the yeast and oxygen are everywhere in the tank already from the get-go.
Yeah. So you don't recirculate anything.
No, not needed.
Okay. How long are you fermenting for? How long time does it ferment?
Motor oil is usually like 10 to 12 days, but we have done imperial stouts as fast as a bit more than a week.
Yeah.
So like 7-8 days.
Is that active fermentation or is it with a VDK rest?
We usually don't do a VDK rest. Yeah, we do. We don't do a test. We do a rest. So we go up in temperature.
Yeah, okay.
So we get it to...
When are you ramping the temperature up? Is that when you're just about hitting your final gravity, and then you ramp up the temperature, or how?
It depends a little bit on the beer. If we want to, if it's a yeast strain that throws a lot of esters, we want to make, and we don't really want the esters, we keep the cold phase a bit longer, just to be sure that it doesn't make too much esters.
Yeah.
Because it's a very stressful environment, those beers. It's usually like 30 Plato or more. So if you go too warm in the beginning, your yeast will just start to die at some point. And
yeah. And it would also, what's your opinion about, because in my experience, if you have, if you're making a strong stout or strong beer, if you start fermenting at a high temperature, you will get more boozy notes in the end. If you start low and then ramp it up just slowly, you'll get a more, just a fuller beer and no booziness. What's your experience with that?
So yeast usually makes the esters in the first 3 days of fermentation. So that's why we always keep the beer at a certain temperature for 3 days. And then depending on how sure we want to make that the esters don't go out of hand, we let it go.
Yeah.
It's like a saison kind of thing. At some point, you start low and you just let it free rise to 24, 26.
Okay, so you're not cooling it down at all? You're just letting it free rise?
We hold it at first temperature, so that's usually either 19 or 21. It depends a lot on what yeast you're using.
Yeah.
Can be 15. So primary fermentation temperature. And after 3 or 4 days, we let the cooling off, and it will rise on its own to 24 or 25. And then we cap it again, because you don't want to go higher, because the yeast will kill itself.
Okay, awesome. So what about the VDK rest? You say you don't really, you're not concerned about that, or so you're not concerned about off flavors in that way? Is that because you have so much control over the initial fermentation, or because usually my rule of thumb is if you have an active fermentation in 5 days, you have to give it 5 days for a VDK rest.
We give it a VDK rest as long as the beer needs to get stable.
Okay.
So we just let it. So let's say we have imperial stout that starts at 19 C. After 3 days, we let it go to 25 or 24, and then we just keep it at that temperature until the final gravity is stable, and then we crash it. And in our beers, you will not. If there is any diacetyl left, you will not taste it because there's so much going on.
Yeah, you're probably right. What's your
in
take?
IPAs, you have to be more careful, but
yeah, okay. So in stouts, it's not that big of a deal. In IPAs or other beers, it's more of a big deal.
Yeah, we have done a couple of West Coast IPAs that we thought, this needs a little bit longer warm.
Yeah, okay. So you're just tasting every day to see when it's ready?
When we do alcohol measurements, we have Anton Paar. Yeah, it's an LX500, but it's like an alkalizer, so you can very precisely measure the gravity and the alcohol.
Okay.
Meaning that we can very precisely say when the beer is stable, when it's done.
Yeah.
and then we just cold crush it and go from there.
Okay. So what's your take or what's your opinion on adding muscovado sugar or any other sugars in the fermentation? Are you doing that?
Want to do this one, George? You've been silent for a bit. I'm sorry. I got on your rant on yeast. It's just you set me up, and there I go.
Yeah, I know. It was a trap. I was setting you up for a trap. No, I took some time to get some answers out at
Yeah, that's
YouTube,
awesome.
so yeah, I was just entertained by listening to you. No, I mean the sugar addition. We do use sugars. There's no point of not saying we don't use sugars. I mean, we brew these 30 to 40 Plato beers, so we obviously end up using some sugars. We try to use mostly maltose syrups whenever we got to refer to those. But we also see sugar as an ingredient. That's fun because most breweries would just look at sugar as a way to get to a mean to get to an end. But we've used a different range of sugars. We've used muscovado, for example, to impart some more of the caramel flavors. We've used Belgian candy syrup just recently to brew a Belgium-inspired stout. We use maltodextrin to get some thicker backbone. We don't use any lactose. That's something we've stopped doing over a year ago.
Yeah.
Honestly, that's just a philosophical standpoint on a sustainable aspect, and also because of sustainable on the beer itself. We've seen some of the beers, they don't age as well when they have lactose in it, so we just stopped using completely.
Okay.
Because we like our beers to age better as fast as possible. Muscovado we've used a few times. We've used some other darker molasses style sugars, but we use them during fermentation if needed. We use them during boil if needed. We've used them after the beer is actually done and right about to be packaged. So we don't pasteurize any of our beers, but you've got other means to stabilize. And most of all, we also centrifuge our beers, so they're free of yeast and particles. So we get some, we can ensure some stability on the product. And we've added some post-fermentation sugars as well to better capture the flavor. Because if you add the sugar during fermentation, I recall we did maple syrup once, and we did like 10 or 15% of the whole recipe was maple syrup, something that was just from a financial standpoint just not reasonable. And the beer had no maple flavor, even though it was like 15% in there. So we have then used some maple syrup post fermentation to capture better the flavor of maple syrup. So it really depends on what you're trying to get again.
Okay, so you actually have tried to back sweeten with maple syrup because you centrifuge and all the yeast is gone, so you can actually back sweeten it. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You can also freeze distill a beer like we've done in some of these beers.
Yeah.
I guess we can leave that freeze distillation process for a second opportunity, but it's something that we also do around here to concentrate the alcohol content that also creates stability in your products.
That's a huge amount of beer to freeze distillate.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what about pH in your? Are you worried about the pH going into the fermenter?
As a checking mechanism, yes. It's checking if the batches are reliable, I would say.
Okay. So it's just
not so much on the pH before fermentation. We have dialed in the pH pretty well right now.
Yeah, so we've tried to adjust that. So there's a lot of brewers that tend to brew by numbers and not a reference to the brewery, just actually brew by a technical standpoint where you read that your post-boil pH should be comprised between 4.9 and 5.1 pH. And they go to the extent of adding extra minerals to it to just make sure their wort is within the guidelines. We've tried that, but since we run this direct fire kettle, our pH is usually on the lower end at 4.7 to 4.8 post-boil because it just caramelizes a lot and brings a lot of the, caramel as low pH brings out some of these acidic compounds that bring down the pH. back in the past, we tried to adjust that to, play by the book and make sure we were within standards. But more and more, we're trying to just let the beer talk itself and make these decisions flavor-driven
Okay.
and not as much data-driven. So we tend to just let the pH, if it is 4.6, sometimes happens. Going into the FB, we just let it be. And usually the final pH in a beer, and Rowan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am, the finishing pH in beer is not related to the starting pH before fermentation. So it doesn't mean if you start low for a stout, like 4.6, 4.7 sounds super low because your finishing pH should be between 4.2 and 4.5.
Yeah.
So 4.6, 4.7 sounds to be super low, but what we see, it's they're not correlated most of the times.
Okay. So where are you ending up? Are you ending up at around those 4.2 or 4.5 or what?
Really depends on the beer and the yeast. I would say mostly depends on the yeast and if you're doing any dry hops.
Yeah.
But yeah, usually we get our imperial stouts between 4.4 and 4.6.
Okay.
That's normal. We are not worried that if it is lower, we will probably look into the process if something happened. And the same if it's higher. Like, did we use any adjuncts that increase the pH significantly? We have seen some beers that go as high that you almost get uncomfortable, but not really, because there's so much alcohol. It should be fine.
Yeah. Okay, so you're not adjusting the final pH. You're just taking a measurement to see if it's actually just in the ballpark, or you hit your target number, and you don't adjust it.
Depends
And if there's something wrong, you
flavor.
will take a look at the process instead.
No, we look at the flavor first and then check the pH if the pH matches the flavor. So usually if you have a lower pH, you will get some more, in stouts, roasty notes, some more sharp notes. And if you get the pH higher, it will be more round, sometimes chalky. So that's a thing to watch out for. But if the flavor lacks something, pH is usually one of the things we look at to tweak. But we don't do a lot of that in stouts, though.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, basically that was we went through the motor oil. Let's talk a little bit about the barcode, because that's a barrel-aged beer, and what are your thoughts on barrel aging in general? Because again, just like the imperial stouts, I think you're one of the best breweries in Europe to barrel age beers. So how do you select the barrels, and what's your philosophy behind the barrel aging?
Shall I take this one, George, or do you want to take this one?
No, I'll go this one in memory of our dear colleague Michiel. So Michiel is our barrel manager. He takes great care of the barrels. It's funny because it kind of sells a line between regular beers and barrel-aged beers, but we share the same principle of deciding beers by flavor. So while most other breweries, they just decide they have this brand that should go well into a barrel. They just make the same beer, put it in a barrel, and magically hope that something nice comes out of it. But we've seen that it doesn't work that way. So the beers you brew to have barrel aged, they're not necessarily the same beers you brew to have regularly. So we often don't do motor oil barrel aged, for example. It's something that we just don't do anymore. So our current approach with most of the barrel aged stouts, we just get a base stout brewed, and by base I mean 40 Plato, between 35 and 40 Plato, so a bit higher than the regular beers. There we use some unfermentable sugars to make sure they withstand enough body to go over the aging process, which we've seen that tends to drive away some body and some
Mm.
depth from these beers, so they need to be really thick and creamy going in. It's quite fun because most beers that go into barrel aging are borderline drinkable, as in they don't really taste good, but when they came out, they're insane. So that's kind of the funny thing about barrel aged beers. But we just make that beer usually also more bitter, a bit more roasted malt, so just everything but more to achieve that intensity. But we don't have a goal in our sight, so we don't make a recipe saying we're going to use marshmallows. We don't make a beer saying we're going to use coconut. We have the barrels, and we can make a wort that fits those barrels. So let's say you have port wine, for example. Port wine carries a lot of these cherry notes to it and some acidity. So for those recipes, maybe we get some more dried fruit, like specialty malts that will, and dark roast caramel malts that will enhance those prune plum-like flavors that will pair well with the cherry notes from the port barrel. If we have some bourbons, maybe we go for a plain base where we just focus on a lot of caramels to capture a lot of that coconut vanilla you get from bourbons, and so on, so on, so on. So we try to have a palette of elements in our barrel warehouse. We keep about 260 barrels these days, so it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot of space to manage, and quite a lot of barrels to taste as well, which is good, but takes a lot of work.
Mm.
So Michiel just goes around every other week with a tasting set. So we try to so we have a schedule, a pretty elaborate one, that after 6 months we start testing out the barrels. Usually less is better for barrel aged stouts, so, or for barrel aged beers in general. When you see 3 years, I tend to frown upon. I think the sweet spot's about 1 year old barrels, because you still have beer flavor and some of the barrel flavor in there. But Michiel just goes around collecting tasting notes on those barrels, and we try to rate them, see which ones are aging and performing better, and then depending on the necessity of projects, we'll assemble some of these beers. Some others get picked for the indulgence for our guild membership club that every 2 months has a exclusive release of a barrel aged beer. No adjuncts, just a pure stout and barrel. But it's a lot of work trying to figure out how these pieces fit together to make the puzzle. For example, if I tell you that in a session we have 6 beers, 3 beers clearly stand out. They're the best out of the 6 individually. And any sane person would think that the 3 best, when combined together, would make it even better. That's just logical reasoning. But the funny thing is, if you mix up the 3 best barrels that we have on that session, does not always mean that it's a better beer. We've seen cases where the combination of 3 great beers turned out to be a bad beer. I'm not sure how this is possible, but that's why we have to make these decisions flavor driven and not necessarily just randomly pick them. So sometimes the not so good barrels on their own, they will impart some flavor ranges to the best beer we have, and when combined, it gets something amazing. So great props to Michiel. I'm not sure if he's around, but he's doing a lot of this boring work to find the right combinations to make it really work well. The same with adjuncts, and after we have the base blend, we make a sample and analyze if and what adjuncts are suitable to the beer.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. So basically, you're yeah. I heard that before. If you're gonna barrel age, you need a thicker beer. So yeah, and then you're actually dialing in your recipe for each barrel. Yeah, I think that's awesome. What about? Are you worried about oxygen and infections in your barrels, or are your stouts that they're high in ABV? So are they not taking any infections in, or how are you treating your barrels?
So usually we get our barrels pretty fresh, meaning that they still have liquor in them. meaning that they still should be sterile. So sometimes we roll them around to get the liquor everywhere, but usually our beers will also take care of it. And oxygen, yeah, we are quite concerned about it, because if you put a imperial stout on barrels and you keep the headspace in the barrel like this, you will end up with soy sauce.
Okay.
That's the oxidation effect of on imperial stouts. Usually gets soy. So Michiel tops them off several times. So, he does the first round, and fermentation makes CO2. So you usually have a bit of foam on top, which will collapse over time. So he puts an airlock on it and then puts a little bit more beer in there, just to make sure there's no oxygen in the headspace. But the micro oxygenation by the wood, we are not concerned about. That's so little that it's usually the right amount we want to have, because it also contributes to the beer complexity at the end.
Yeah, exactly. It's part of the flavor, part of the barrel aging. Yeah. So what about temperature? Do you keep the barrels in a cool storage facility, or is it just in the warehouse, or how?
It's in the warehouse, so it's open to the changes of season. But it actually helps the barrel aging process, I would say, because wood expands and contracts when it gets warmer and colder, meaning that you get a faster interaction between the wood and the beer.
Okay.
So I think you should not keep your barrel in a climate controlled room, because it will just slow down your aging.
Okay.
Do you agree, George? That's
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if you have in a climate controlled room, you can actually control your climate. So you can simulate the seasons, but I do agree that the seasonal rotation helps with barrels. I think Netherlands being a naturally off cold country actually helps. Back my days in Portugal, you'd see a much faster aging because the weather was just warmer. So aging at 30 degrees Celsius will just accelerate the reactions. So if you're able to go a little bit colder and some changes, you can better find the peak point of taste in each of your barrels.
Cool. Do you have any favorite barrels? Any favorite companies you get barrels from?
Well, companies exactly, I'm not sure who we work with. That's more on Michiel's field of expertise. I would say that bourbons are just a natural fit for stouts.
Yeah.
They're just a natural fit. I mean, I really like rum, but that's because that's maybe the only spirit that I actually care for.
Okay.
So if I have to drink a spirit, that's the only one, or a spirit neat with nothing added. It's the one that I enjoy the most. I'm not much of a whiskey or bourbon guy, but I think in stouts they can be pretty nice if they're worked well nicely. Like the beer you have there, the Barcode Blue, Platinum and Blue. It's a bourbon and rum barrel age. But I'd say bourbon, it's just a perfect fit for stouts.
Yeah, it seems to be a popular choice. Yeah. Cool. So
I quite like the tequila as well, though. It's like it gives a punch. Tequila is like pure. When it gets back into the beer, it's like a booze punch, which can really help the balance in a beer sometimes. But
yeah.
It's from bourbon, tequila. Yeah.
So what about so now we got the beer in the barrel and it's done. So it's time for getting it in cans or bottles. What's the process there? Is it going back into a tank to carbonate, or what are you doing? And what are you measuring? Are you measuring pH again, or is it just going on bottles?
Yeah, so usually Michiel does trials first before we put something back in a tank. So he trials what barrels needs to get into the tank, and then we get them in the bright beer tank. We send a sample to the lab because we care a lot about not exploding our cans or bottles. Usually, I think on barrel-aged beers we never had a contamination, but it's something to keep in mind and always check, because the problem can be in a very small corner, I would say. So we get it into the bright beer tank, we carbonate it, and then we taste it from the tank, and then we decide if it needs something else.
Okay.
Can be a mineral addition, can be acid, can be like the beer you are about to taste. I don't know if you cracked it yet, but
No.
the barcode, I think we thought it needed some spice, some nuttiness, maybe towards cinnamon, and that's exactly what Tonka will provide, because that's the one with Tonka, right? The Tonka rum and bourbon. Yeah.
Okay,
So then we decide.
So you actually add some adjuncts right there after the barrel aging in the bright tank?
If needed, yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
The adjuncts are always post barrel aging and not before barrel aging.
Oh,
yeah. Otherwise it gets, any oxygen will hurt adjuncts even more than the beer, so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, I guess that was all my questions about the process. So, so now we're getting into the glass. So what's the best way to drink an imperial stout in your eyes? What's the temperature like? What should the glass be like?
What I learned was that the temperature of the stout should be the amount of alcohol that's in there. So if you have a 15% ABV stout, it should be 15C.
Yeah.
I like them a touch colder than that, because our barrel-aged beers are usually like 14, 15, 16% alcohol. Like 12C, I think is nice. For the glassware, George, what would you recommend? Go on.
I would go with the snifter, and on the temperature, what I would say, like, it depends if you're drinking the beer you're not, but since we sell most of our beers, well, we sell all of our beers in 44 CL cans with the exception of Indulgence that comes in a 37.5 CL bottle. If you're drinking the beer you're on, what I would say, just add the beer in the refrigerator, take it off, open it, catch yourself maybe a small pour, and get acquainted with the beer. And after, as you drink through the beer, it's not a beer that you drink in half an hour or 20 minutes. Maybe it takes you a couple of hours to get through a full can if you're doing your own. So I like to see the beers kind of developing in flavors, because due to our job nature, we get to drink these beers super cold, because they need to be kept super cold before packaging. And they show a certain profile. So we get to experience the beers more cold than most people. And then as they warm up, they develop flavors. So I think that's also a good experience that the consumer should have, just being able to see the beer increase in temperature. And I think a snifter, if you hold it with a palm in your hands, it will just warm up as you see through it. So just like that.
So it's kind of a journey to see how the beer warms up and the flavors open up.
If there's one set temperature, I agree with Rowan. It should be fairly the amount of degree numbers that's in there. So it should be like 14C, 12C for most of our beers. But I would say that even higher, like 20 some C, like body temperature, would be an interesting approach. There's some brandy culture where people actually warm up glasses to drink warm brandies at 30 some C. And I think that also can benefit a stout to develop some and get really some more volatiles out there. So if you have a can for yourself, you can pretty much drink like 3 different beers, starting cold, going to room temperature, and going to slightly warm.
Yeah.
And you get yourself 15 cl pours that gives you 3 complete different experiences.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So so it's been actually over an hour now. Let's go into some questions from the viewers. What's the craziest thing you have done in the brewery?
We've done so many crazy things. I don't know. It's difficult to isolate just one. Yeah, all the adjuncts we get to use. I always tell the story. We last year made this rye wine with the raisins in collaboration with Gallia from Belgium, and we tried to get the right choice of adjuncts for our beers. So next I know, I'm just looking online for raisins, and I never thought that there's more than one raisin. To me, raisin, it's a word. So there's a thing that's called raisins. I go to the supermarket, I buy raisins,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, I'm just purchasing like 10 different kinds of raisins, and I'm having a raisin tasting at the brewery with my colleagues, and that's kind of mind blowing. That all of a sudden you're exploring like a unique ingredient you want to use, and you get to explore that one thing to a deep extent to find the best one to add to your beer. We've done the same with chilies, we've done the same with chocolates or coffee, but those things we know from art that they exist in several varieties. While raisins, it was like, wow, what am I doing? So it's I'll take raisins, but black cardamom. We're now working on cherry pits. There's a crazy a lot of stuff that we've used around here.
Mm.
You kind of got that. Rob built a new additions tank for us just to put more nuts into a beer, because we had a little additions tank, 200 liters. It was just not cutting it. We needed to do it 2 or 3 or 4 times over the bright beer tank. So he built us a new one, which fits like 6 times the amount. That was quite crazy. First time we used that thing was a party. It was peanuts, right? I think it was peanuts. Yeah. It was like half a ton of peanuts going in.
Okay.
460 kilos, if memory serves me right.
For how many liters?
5,000.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Less than 5,000, I would say. 45. Yeah, something like that.
Okay, so are there any adjuncts that doesn't fit in a beer?
Yes, George. Are there any adjuncts? You had one, right?
You want to go for apples?
Yes, green apple, right? Green apple was a bit of a... No, I'm not sure. We can try anything, but I think you need to be aware of the combination it makes with the beer.
Yeah.
You can make a lot of adjuncts work in a certain beer style.
Yeah, I think I've overcome my past fear of apples. That's my thing, because apples, like acetaldehyde, it's a common flavor in beers.
Yeah, exactly.
And especially in stouts, because you're dealing, as we've touched upon, alpha yeast, and it's related to yeast health. So whenever I have a beer that tastes like green apples, kind of triggers me in the wrong way, because I feel like something's wrong with the beer. So it needs to be, it's walking on eggshells. It can be worked on, and I think they'll make me do it at some point. But I think it's troublesome. So I've had a lot of beers with apple, and most of them just resemble the off flavor. So it needs to have the perfect fitting to make it work. For example, we're now working on a beer with bitter almond, which I think it's a very invasive type of flavor. So it needs to be tailored correctly to make sure you only capture the part you want of those flavors. So for that, it may mean that we do some research, like on terms of food items, to see how those flavors are placed in the actual world to taste pleasantly, and then we try to translate into our world in beer. But I would say green apple is the one that fears me the most, or apples in general.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So, who's your brewing idols? Which breweries do you really look up to? And yeah,
Well, it depends on which style of beer we're talking about.
we're still
I
talking about
know.
stouts, I think. Yeah.
In stouts, I would say the Colonel in London uh, got me inspired to do a lot of these hoppy stouts we've been doing in the past couple of years. Even though we brew them in our own fashion, they were and still are one of the few brave breweries that can bring nice hoppy stouts and some other beers. And I think they have a nice balance between modern styles and classic styles. And I try to get inspired by that balance that they portray in their beers.
Yeah, cool. So I'm just gonna look through some of the questions here. Talked about that. So when you're doing a double mash, are you just mixing all the grains, or are you waiting for with the roasted grains to the second batch, or how are you doing that?
We mix them all together. So the way we have the brewery set up, everything's milled together, everything's contained in a box, and that everything gets dispensed simultaneously.
Okay.
In the past, we've done cold steeping, which is pretty common in stouts, but we've made some blind tasting back then, and we couldn't really spot the difference on doing such a thing. It might be related to our brewing kit, but we need to adjust as it goes. And I think that's the key here. Like, we have our brewing kit, so we have our grain conveyor belt, we have our mash tun, our mash filter, and the next brewery, they can just copy our process, but it just doesn't mean it won't work out. You just need to get your foundation and see and adjust to what works out in your equipment.
Yeah, because usually when I double mash, I use all the base malts in the first mash just to get all the enzymes going, and then I switch it out with the specialty malts and stuff like that. Okay, yeah. After Sweden, we talked about that. Okay, here's a question from one of the Danish beer bloggers. So after winning the best foreign brewery in Denmark, have you seen your sales have they increased, or the demand for your beers in Denmark, have they increased after that?
I don't know. I just make beer. I think Rowan is even more blind than I am to sales. I know that Denmark is a pretty important country to us. We get a lot of feedback, and we have a sense of community out there. So we really like this connection we have with Denmark. I'm not really sure if that means we're doing more sales or not, but again, I'm a brewer. Like, making sales not really top of my priorities at the moment. It's more being able to create this sense of community and being present in these actions. I've done with Niels, together with Niels at Flanner Liquids, who does the distribution in Denmark. We've done live videos with him. I've been present at the award that was given to us. We're here now, so it's something that we take some pride of doing, and we want to be part of the community. If it sells more or not, I don't really know, but I hope it does, because I still need a place to work next week.
Cool. So there is someone who's asking if there's any chocolate malt that actually tastes like chocolate. How do you bring out the chocolate flavor in a stout?
Just chocolate. That's the easy answer.
You use it 7 times in the process, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But if you only gotta use malts, how do you bring out the chocolate flavors?
I would say a combination between caramel malt, brown malt, and chocolate malt. Those three combined, they will enhance the chocolate flavor. I would say that brown malt to me even tastes more like chocolate than actually chocolate malt. and chocolate malt, just a straight up coffee
Yeah.
flavor.
Yeah. Okay. So the caramel and the brown malt to actually get out the sweetness and the chocolate flavor, and then just kind of the bitterness and the roastiness from the chocolate malt.
Yeah, I think brown malt is a very overlooked grain, all in
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. Cool. Um, I think you answered a lot of them just in the chat here.
Yeah, I've been dropping some answers.
Yeah. Bittering house, we did that as well.
But if you see any topic worthwhile of going further, feel free to
Yeah,
bring that up.
there's an interesting one here. Do you have any favorite beer brand regarding barrels? Barrel aging in general. Who besides you, who makes the best barrel aged stouts?
That's difficult.
Larvish is doing very well, I would say.
Yeah.
The Wreck House.
There's a few. I mean, I really like Poyala. They're great friends. Puhaste, they also make some great stuff. It's difficult to pick out one as a whole because I mean beers, even our beers. I mean, most of them I think they're great, but I'm biased, of course. I think it really depends on each individual beer and where you also drink those beers, when you drink those beers, with who you drink those beers. But we won't say anything that you guys are not really thinking. Like Lervik's a great call. Nerd Brewing in Sweden also doing great stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good beers out there.
Yeah, yeah. Luckily, there's a lot of good beers out there. Yeah, yeah. And how are you staying on top of that? Because there are really a lot of great breweries, and just the last 5 years in Denmark, anyway, there have been a lot of new breweries, and I guess it's the same all over Europe and the US as well. But how are you staying on top of your game? What's your inspiration, and how do you keep? Because I see you guys as one of the. If I'm thinking about if I'm drinking a barrel aged stout or just an imperial stout, I'm always comparing it to you guys. So how are you going to stay up there in the future?
I think it's the brewers. You need to find passionate people that like not just beer but flavor in general, that are always exploring new things. People that like to travel to just find what's being done out there, and you keep promoting this and fomenting this creative mind to stay out there. And I think our savviness for getting the best beers out there always and never having a perfect recipe, it's what makes us a foundation for the future and set us for success. You see a lot of breweries that they've made a recipe 5, 10, 12 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, and it worked great back in that time. But our palates are constantly changing. I'm pretty sure that your habits, be that drinking or eating habits, are not the same you had last 10 years. I mean, they're changing constantly. So no one has drink, or most people don't drink the same beverage their entire life or eat the same food. We need to change. And that's the same with beers. We could make cranked juice or fruit bomb or mozzarella and saying that we're never changing the way we make this beer. We have to change. We need to stay relevant, and we need to understand the trends in the market, what people are looking for, what is changing in those people palates, and try to anticipate their needs and change our beers to stay top of our game. So it's a very demanding job, but I think the brewers are the ones to that can best get these beers out there.
Yeah, cool.
I would say we are not aiming for consistency, but we are aiming for a consistent, better product. Let's say consistently better product, and I think that's what will get us on top of everything. Let's say.
Yeah, cool, awesome. I think that was a good way to round off. So have you got anything your last thing to say to the viewers, or anything about the topic? Cool. Yeah. Well, that's that's okay. Yeah, it was awesome to have you. It was really great to learn more about the way you are brewing stouts. So thank you for being here.
No, I'd like to thank everyone that tuned in and everyone that will watch this eventually far in the future. Thanks for all the support. I guess thanks to you guys for just be curious to drink our beers, and thank you, Lars, for showing up interest to having us here, to have us be the first brewery that you're talking to, and perhaps the first time you do such a live interview and all that. It's
Yeah.
pretty awesome, and I hope that some of these insights can be helpful to get better beer out there, because better beer is always better. So
Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.